Okay, welcome to level 2, restorative week. We are going to settle into seated centering, quieting pose to begin our class. Before we get going, make sure you have your chair. We use a lot of props today. We're going to have a couple blocks and something extra to support your head. Could be another block, or it could be a bolster or a couple blankets. And then several blankets and a strap. We're going to be using a wall as well, so if you can set yourself up with wall access, putting the short edge of the mat against the wall, that's going to be great. So taking some time to sit up nice and tall and adjusting the shoulders so they arrive in line with the hips. Just kind of feeling your sitting bones touching the floor, shoulders releasing away from the ears. See if you can tap into the weight of your legs and allowing that weight to surrender down to support you. And sensing the breath, noticing as much as you can about your breath, the rhythm, the length of the inhale, the length of the exhale, paying attention to any pausing between the breaths, noticing any movement associated with the breathing. And if there is movement, where is the movement? See if you can visualize the journey your breath is taking as it moves in and out of your body. Noticing where the breath touches within you and where it maybe does not. Taking some time to sit still so we can sense our intention for this practice. And as you're ready, joining your hands, bowing toward your own heart. And lift your head, let your eyes gently open. And welcome. All right, so we're going to begin with Virasana, seated hero, and then taking it to Supta Virasana, reclining hero. So just have your reclining hero set up ready to go so that when we come from hero pose, we can move right into the reclining hero pose. So we're going to take our blanket, spread it out if this is something you use for support. And also setting up whatever supports you use for the reclining hero pose. Maybe it's a block, second block, and a bolster if you need a little bit more height. Maybe it's a bolster or something soft directly on the ground, nice and flat. Maybe it's even a chair if you need a little bit more height. And if you find that your sitting bones need some support, of course, you're going to take the support of a block or an additional blanket so that your sitting bones have something to touch down upon, to anchor into. And then just making some finely tuned adjustments so that you feel that your knees are supported, they are in alignment. You feel like your toes are all sitting down evenly. And then placing your hands on the soles of the feet, just begin to adjust the shoulders back, adjust the skull back. Move the tailbone into the body. Just kind of sensing the initial stages of opening. Feel the fronts of your ankles starting to extend. Feel the support this pose provides to the bottoms of your feet. The feet that are usually kind of inverted in the other direction. The arches of the feet are really supported here. If it's helpful to close your eyes, maintaining either a soft gaze or closing the eyes just to kind of power down any energy that you're drawing through the eyes. And just see if you can bring a little bit of awareness to your outer shins. Just kind of rolling the flesh of the outer shins toward the floor. You might think about the small toes pressing into the floor to help you bring the outer shins down. So the idea is to maintain kind of the sense of foundation you have in your legs and in your knees as you recline back. So keeping that, begin to just kind of gently guide your torso back onto your setup. And then you're going to continue to keep your hands low until you feel that you're able to reach the arms overhead without losing any of that foundation. And you might grab your elbows, you might extend your arms toward the direction behind you, evenly kind of extending your arms. Making sure that your sitting bones are still supported. Still having some awareness about the outer shins, rolling back toward the floor. Breathing into the extension of the front thighs, the hip flexors. And keeping your face, your eyes soft, passive. Your jaw slackened. And throughout our restorative practice today, just noticing how the breath shows up in every single pose, and particularly the exhalation. So in a pose like this, where we have the diaphragm really wide open, you might notice more of a tendency to inhale and maybe a little bit more challenge to extend your exhale. And just see if you can count off 11 or 12 breaths, which is approximately a minute for most of us. And then if your hands or arms are up above, you're going to start to move your hands back toward your feet. Keeping the breastbone really forward, finding your way back up. And now we're going to set up for downward facing dog with wall support. We're going to put 2 blocks against the wall. So we're going to kind of clear your mat. We also want to be supporting the head. So you can use a blanket, you can use a bolster, you can use a third block. You're going to put 2 low blocks against the wall for your heels. And then whatever you're going to use for the head, just kind of have it hanging out, waiting for you, kind of right under your nose. And then you can come into downward facing dog. Just the heels are going to receive the support of the block. So the arches of the feet are unsupported and the toes are on the ground. And then the head will rest on whatever you've set up there. And again, just kind of feeling or sensing the breath. Maybe here you can dive a little deeper into your exhalation. In pranayama today, we're going to be exploring the exhalation and a little bit of breath retention, holding the breath out. The theme around this week's restorative practice is rest and digest, which is the parasympathetic nervous system state that we can promote with a really healthy exhalation. After a little while, you might need to adjust your head support down. Not all of us, but maybe some of us. We'll hold about another minute. So again, you can just kind of be with your breath. And go ahead and bring your knees down and come into child's pose. Maybe using the support for your head that you were using for downward dog. Maybe not using it, but try to keep the neck, consider the neck alignment when you do place the head. We don't want to have the head down super low. We'd rather be on the forehead than the crown. So just kind of sensing that. Keeping your arms extended and active. Now we're going to start to move into a different version of a supported downward facing dog. So you can keep your blocks where they are, but we're going to face the wall now and use the blocks for the hands. You can put your head support aside. We're just going to have 2 blocks for the hands. And you're just going to kind of grab the block so that your fingers are on the top surface and your thumb is on the side of the block. And you're not smashing your palm up into the block, you're kind of cupping so that you have a little bit of air space between the palm and the block. And you can find your way up into that extended downward facing dog. And now I realize some of us have issues with wrists, so you can turn your fingers 45 degrees if you need to, and kind of use more of the heel of the hand and the base of the thumbs. So the idea here is to get support and to feel a little bit of more length in the upper body than we're used to here, which gives us a little more freedom, space, and quietness. And see if you can use the pressure of the hands on the blocks into the wall to help drag the shoulder blades in toward the chest. This version is a little more active, so we're just going to hold about 1.5 minutes.
Keep the head in a relaxed position, just letting the head kind of fall through the space of the arms. About 5 or 6 more breaths. You can start to make your way back to child's pose. And take the knees wide, bring the feet together. Keep the arms forward. Rest the head, either again on the floor, on a block, or a prop. And create some sort of a dynamic relationship between your arms and your feet. Grabbing the floor with your toenails with a little bit more intention or purpose. Drawing the tailbone toward the floor. As you extend the arms out away from you. This pose really emphasizing the exhalation with the compression to the front body. And just kind of lean into the long, soothing exhalation. Just a few more breaths. And on an in-breath, you can just kind of rise up out of it. We're going to set up for Supta Baddha Konasana. We're going to start to kind of prime the hips for pigeon pose and also half lotus pose and reclining half lotus pose. So what we're going to do is take reclining bound angle pose. We're going to elevate the feet on a block. I'm actually going to use my other block because it's a little bit thicker and I want my feet just a little bit higher. And we're going to set up for reclining. So you could have a bolster behind you. You could have a rolled blanket or 2 blankets rolled together, depending on how thick you want it. And you're going to bind your legs. So let's start just by placing whatever it's going to be behind you. Running with the spine, so kind of a vertically running soft prop. And maybe a little bit of additional height for your head. If you have tight hips, you might want to also find something to prop your knees or your hips, anywhere between your knees and your hips, so that you feel cradled. You don't grip to kind of hold yourself here. That's going to be kind of self-defeating. And then make a loop that's going to contain your legs. So you'll start just kind of taking the loop and making it really generous, and then you can make it smaller once you know what you're working with today. So it's going to go over the torso, down to the hips, down to the sacrum, and then taking some underneath the toes, and then you're going to take care of that slack. You're just going to pull the belt until you have no more slack and you're in your kind of your first edge where you can't go much farther because you're just not ready. That's kind of where we want to start. And then again, we're going to elevate the feet. But before we do that, just kind of come back onto your setup. Make sure your head has the height it needs so that your neck is long. And then you can kind of tuck the block underneath you. And this gives us a little bit of a better chance of opening. You may not need that. So just once you're down and you've propped your feet, if you're getting kind of red flag signals, then take that block away and just work with your feet down on the floor. Backs of the hands are resting. The chin tucks into the chest. The tailbone should be moving toward the ceiling. The flesh of the buttocks away from the torso. and the lumbar space should feel long. So if your lumbar feels kind of compacted or telescoped or scrunched up, just take a moment to lift your butt, pull it away from your torso, and see if you can elongate the lumbar space. The propping underneath you should be starting behind the rib cage. We don't want to prop the lumbar. That's not going to feel good. Again, you're in an open diaphragm pose. So you're probably noticing your inhales are really spacious and nice and big. Exhales maybe are, you have to work a little harder to fully extend. And we're not trying to change the breath here. So just notice that. You don't have to force that exhale. Just notice what shows up with each pose. Okay, we're going to go just a step farther. So you're going to try to help yourself up. You can use your forearms or your hands. We're going to open the belt a little bit, and we're going to put a spacer between the feet. We're going to get our hips even more open. So just put a little slack in your belt so you can put a spacer of a block between your feet. It's probably going to be the narrow edge of the block. It may be wider. That really depends on what your body is telling you. But you're going to put that spacer in. You're still elevated, unless you weren't before. Then you're doing you. You do you. But at this point, you're probably elevated and spacing the feet. Now you're going to recline back again. And we'll stay another minute and a half. Just kind of sensing the difference there. We're just getting the hips even more open, the groins even more extended. Halfway through. Good. So our job now is to kind of release the legs. We're going to keep ourselves reclining. I'm going to have you see if you can slide a foot out of your belt and just kind of let the block fall and take your feet out to the edges of the mat. Let the knees come together and just take a few more breaths, letting the groins kind of contract a little bit and letting the hips come back into internal rotation, just a counter pose here, just to kind of soothe the benefits, the effects of reclining bound angle pose. And as you feel ready, you just help yourself to either side and come upright from there. And you can start to kind of deconstruct all of that. Move the props aside. We're going to set up for pigeon pose now, and you may need your bolster and or blanket. So just keep things really close by. They don't have to be on the mat, but just nearby. And you can come into table pose, into downward facing dog. And we're just gonna float the right knee toward the right wrist and float the right ankle toward the left wrist to create that shape of pigeon pose. So the bolster could be, if you have a significant amount of height of your right hip space away from the floor, use a bolster maybe. Otherwise, it might just be the blanket. So just kind of fill in that negative space so that you can have your hips on the same plane, that you're not kind of sitting down on the right hip a lot. And then you're gonna just kind of extend that left leg back behind you, open the chest. You can also support underneath the left front thigh. So another blanket or even the bolster can go there. So it's an important, sometimes it's not as obvious as, you know, the obvious right hip here, but the left hip flexor might need some attention and support. You're gonna exhale down and place your forehead, and you might use a prop, you might stack your hands or fists, but again, we don't wanna kind of dunk the head, so have your neck kind of consistent, moving with the rest of the spine. We'll be on each side for 2 minutes. And as you hold the pose, just track with it, so we don't just go into screensaver mode. So track with it, meaning you might need more depth after holding it for a certain amount of time. You can inch the left leg back, you can inch the right shin forward. You can kind of unprop some of that right hip or left hip flexor. And so just stay with that moving target, which is your pose, paying attention to what is needed and doing the needful. Notice how this pose supports exhale, extending, and notice how that supports finding more depth and sensation in the hip opener. So if you can kind of let yourself grow heavy with those exhales, you can start to break through some of those layers of tension that surround the hip and prevent us from going deeper. You just kind of lean into your exhales and see if that helps you go a bit deeper. That was 2 minutes. We're going to start to come out slowly. You can use your hands to help you free the right leg back behind you. You're back in downward dog. And just take a moment to extend both legs fully, make them really straight and firm. And then we're going to float the left knee to the left elbow, the left ankle to the right wrist, and set up the pigeon pose on the left. So taking some time to create the support you need, which could be very different than the right side. Taking a moment to extend the upper back, the upper spine, and then try to carry that length forward and place your head. Tracking that edge. About another minute to go. Leaning into the exhalations as those breaths flow out. See if you can mind that left hip space a little bit more. Maybe the right hip flexor is starting to yawn open, becoming more convex than concave. And emptying the next exhalation, you can start to come back to downward dog on the in-breath. Using your hands against the floor, taking the right toes under, extending the left leg back. And again, just really firm and straighten both legs, compressing the legs from front to back. And go ahead and place your knees, cross your ankles, and you're going to sit back. And now we're going to kind of get into our half lotus pose and attempt to recline it. So whatever the setup was for your reclining hero pose, you're probably going to have a similar, slightly lower setup. So I had the incline plus bolster, so 2 blocks inclining up towards the head side and a bolster. So I'm going to drop down to a flat bolster. So whatever your setup was, just do the same thing, but make it just slightly lower. And we're going to start with right leg crossing over left leg, log stacking pose. And this might be where you leave it. And just like hero pose, we want to establish a really solid seated version before we recline. So we're going to spend a little bit of time here with the right shin over the left shin, the right foot over the left knee, the left foot over the, the left knee over, you know what I mean, foot over knee, knee over foot. Usually I teach oppositely to the camera, but today for whatever reason I am not, so I'm confusing myself here. But you kind of can see the idea here. So we're going to take a little bit of time with this before we go farther. Bring your hands in front of you, walk forward, and just bow the head. And that right hip might be giving you some feedback, but hopefully after the pigeon pose that we just did, it's not as bad as it could be. So just know that you might recline back with this position. You might not go into the half lotus pose today, which is perfectly fine. If you are going to attempt the Ardha Padmasana, you're going to just kind of pick up the top leg, the right leg, with your hands, one to the ankle, one to the knee, and just do a little bit of rocking, side to side rocking, and then pausing, kind of stabilizing the leg and bringing the leg as close to your body as you can. You're going to use your free right hand to help you roll and lift the right calf muscle up and out of the way, at which point you can attempt to bring the right heel up to the crease of the groin and thigh. Now we've got to take care of the left leg and kind of put it in the mirror image of where it would be for full lotus pose, which is up here on the right hip crease. So we're going to put it kind of up near the right sitting bone. If your foot tends to slide here, you can kind of help yourself just by holding the foot in place. And now you're going to come back. And again, you might be in the log stacking position that you were in earlier, rather than the Supta Ardha Padmasana, reclining half lotus pose. If your foot stays where it is, then you can feel free to raise your arms overhead. Otherwise, continue to hold the foot and keep the chest lifted. You might turn that right palm up The legs should feel anchored. If the knees try to float up, just keep the knee kind of gravitational pull toward the floor, both knees. I like to include work on the lotus pose during restorative week because the classical pranayama position is the full lotus pose seated. But for many of us, that takes many, many years to develop. But the reason being behind that pose being useful for meditation is that we can essentially kind of, for lack of a better word, shut down the lower portion of the body with the heels kind of pressing down on those arteries right at the hip. So we're siphoning our energy up the body and using that to help us quiet the mind. Okay, so we're going to start to release out of the reclining piece of it. Use your hands, bring yourself up, keeping the chest forward, and then take a moment to gently help that right foot down and extend your legs in front of you. Just kind of putting yourself in Dandasana and taking care to really squeeze that, well, both legs, but making sure to take care of that right knee in case it got a little bit of torque or rotation, which is not the point of that pose. We want to make sure the knee is back in healthy alignment, supported by the constriction of the quadriceps around the knee. And then we're going to just do all of that now to the left. So beginning with your left shin stacking on top of the right shin. From there, just kind of bringing your weight forward and tapping into left hip sensation again, giving it a few breaths. Maybe going deeper. And using an inhalation to bring your torso back up. We're going to be picking up the leg now, the lower leg. So you can cradle with your hands, one to the outer knee, one to the outer ankle. First, just kind of rock a little bit. Bring a little more mobility into the hip joint. And you're going to try to kind of stabilize and stop that motion with your mid shin lining up with your chest. So just kind of landing with that alignment, mid shin and chest. Sitting up tall, see how close you can bring the shin to your chest. So not bringing the chest to your shin, keep yourself sitting up tall, the shin to the chest. And then keeping the foot where it is, you're going to use your left hand to roll that calf muscle from underneath, kind of up, moving that flesh and landing your left heel in the pocket where your thigh meets your pelvis. And then tucking the right foot kind of in a mirror image. If you were to come into full lotus, it would be up here. So you're going to go to the very kind of mirror image beneath the leg. Of course, if I forgot to say this on the first side, but you can come into full lotus for both reclines if you're able to do so. I know a few of you are. So you're going to do that. On me, this is my tighter side. You can see this floating knee. That's not great. So I'm going to use some support to help that knee feel anchored, because again, we want to have the knees kind of moving outward and down, not floating in the breeze here. So keeping that, you're going to start to come back. And again, you can hold the foot if you need to. If you have two free hands, both palms up, one free hand, make sure the palm is up. Lift your chest and tuck your chin toward the chest. You can always support the head higher if necessary. If you feel like your chin is waving in the breeze, lift the back of the head a little bit higher. And another pose where the diaphragm is really wide open. So just noticing that. We're not here to do pranayama on top of asana. We're just noticing breath. About another minute on this side. Propping down if you've started to open a little bit more. Now you're going to use your hands and maybe forearms to come upright, leading with your chest. You want to safely lower the left leg down, so as if the knee is not going to notice. So just moving the foot down without the knee coming any higher is kind of the idea. We're going to transition to Paschimottanasana, which will take care of the knees, but it will also put us in kind of a soothing forward extension. And we're going to try to get the head down. So you might need a chair. That's going to be kind of your highest, the prop that will give you the most modified pose. You probably need something to sit on just so your back doesn't shorten at the lower back. You want to come into concave lumbar for the initial stage of seated forward bend. And then you're going to kind of just test out what you're going to need today, because every time we practice, we show up differently. So even though you needed this combination of things last time you did this pose, always kind of make that fresh assessment so that you're not just going through your practice on autopilot, where our bodies change from hour to hour. So we always have to take fresh notes. So I'm going to guess I need a bolster and a block, which is not as much height as a chair, but it's close. So if you're really tight, you might want to take the edge of a chair. You could use your arms on that edge of the chair. You could put a blanket over it. There's no wrong way to combine your props as long as you're making a correct amount of support for yourself. So the legs are going to be active, toes above heels. We want to have hip distance spacing with your feet. You should take a moment to rotate your thighs. So you're lifting the outer hip up, you're rolling the inner thigh down. Do that on both sides, which will spread you apart underneath the sitting bones, and it will help the sitting bones come down more directly. And you're going to try to come forward with that length in your torso, that concave or flat lumbar, and then taking the arms into a passive place. Again, you can kind of choose where that is. It might be down on the floor, it might be up on your props. Rest your head. Make sure your nose is free and clear. We're going to hold the pose for 2 minutes. The head might be ready to go lower, so just pay attention to that. And start to move out of the pose slowly, not all at once. And you can start to move your props that were on top of you out of the way. We're going to kind of start to segue from that. That's a pretty extreme forward extension. So we want to kind of segue. We don't want to jump into a big back bend. So we're going to do a supported bridge with extended legs. So all you're going to need is your strap, which maybe it's still in the loop. And we'll want to use the loop. But you're going to kind of size yourself so that your wrists, which are going into the loop, are just slightly wider than your shoulders. We're going to attempt to contain the wrists a little bit so that we can broaden the shoulders. So that loop, just size it up and see that your wrists are only a hair beyond the width of the shoulders. And just leave it on one of your arms. And you'll come onto your back. And you'll slide your block underneath your sacrum. Probably the medium horizontal surface is a good one. Otherwise, the tall one. And if your lower back is uncomfortable today, maybe it's the low one. So we always have to Goldilocks it, as they say. So find the height you need here, and then position your wrists in that loop so that you press your wrists into the loop to help the shoulders expand, to broaden, and to ground. And then you're going to extend your legs with the toes up and the heels pressing down. And as the heels press down, you should maybe sense your tailbone starting to move into the soft tissue of the body and toward the ceiling to help neutralize lower back. Try to keep your buttocks soft. It's very easy to kind of let the butt take over this pose. And if you can turn your hands slightly so the thumbs are getting a little more attention, pressing down, your shoulders will feel even more connected with the floor. The inner upper arms will lift, which will help you lift your chest. And you'll get a little boost of energy of the sternum coming toward the chin. Keep rolling your inner thighs down. Imagine the center lines of your thighs running from the pelvis to the kneecaps are facing the ceiling. They're not rotating out. And keep a soft gaze toward your cheeks. And you can go ahead and bend your knees and take the strap off of your wrists and You're gonna bring the strap onto your wrist and just tighten it as much as you need so now that your wrists match your shoulders. We'll use that for shoulder stand. You can leave it on one arm and remove the block. Come to your side. We're gonna set up for shoulder stand. If you are not inverting today, feel free to do legs out the wall pose with something supporting your lower back. It could be a bolster, it could be a stack of a couple blankets that are folded double so they're extra thick. And we're gonna use the wall to come into shoulder stand if you're taking the inversion today. So you'll set up for either pose, legs up the wall or shoulder stand, using blanket support for the shoulder stand. If you're using, if you're taking shoulder stand, I always find it helpful to create that, I call it the blanket sandwich, so you can fold your mat over your blanket stack and have the traction of your sticky mat. So try not to rush the setting up process, because usually it'll get us in the long run anyway. If we rush the setup, we're gonna have to come out of it and set it up again. So just taking care that it's gonna work for you. If you're using the strap for shoulder stand, you can just kind of leave it on your non-dominant arm side. And then you'll start to make your way into Sarvangasana. But first of all, just kind of make sure you're centered. You're even from both sides, and you're also leaving some room at the top so that when we come up, the shoulders don't fall over the blanket stack. We want them right on top of it. And then the wall is such a good support here because it helps us lift our hips. You can take the strap onto the other arm at that point once your hips are off the floor. And then you're going to do that work of kind of rocking to broaden the shoulders and to get the elbows a little bit closer together and to crawl the hands up to the area between your shoulder blades. And then when you're ready, floating the legs up. And if you feel like you start to kind of fall towards the wall with the butt, you can come back to the wall with the feet and kind of scrub your feet down the wall. Kind of bring your hips back above the hips and come back up. Just a few more breaths. Keep lifting the pelvis away from the floor, lifting the legs. And you're going to let your feet come back to the wall. Take your strap away from your arms before you lower down, and you're going to try to move your head and shoulders down to the floor. And then allow your feet either to come into bound angle shape, or you can cross your ankles in swastikasana. Resting, noticing any after effects from shoulder stand or Viparita Karani if you did legs up the wall pose. And now you're gently going to roll to your side. And we're going to set up for plow pose. So the chair is going to be coming into play now. We're going to keep our shoulder stand set up and find additional blanket for the chair because we want our thighs to be supported. We're going to do supported plow pose. So it's a little bit different than the active plow pose. We're going to just kind of drape a blanket so that it comes over the seat. And because the chairs are one height and we are all different sizes and shapes, you may need to adjust the height of blanket over the chair seat so that it meets your thighs and it's so it's not too much or too little. I just know that one blanket works for me, but you might have to kind of finesse that. So the chair will go above where your head is in your shoulder stand. So once you have that, you're going to come back to shoulder stand preparation, this time without the strap because we're going to be using our arms overhead. So you don't need a strap. The chair is above you. So the very same kind of assessment, you want to make sure you're even on your setup, your shoulders are the same distance from the edge, and then you can start to walk up the wall and grab your back, just like you did to come into shoulder stand. And we're going to bringing our legs onto the chair, and you can kind of use your feet maybe to draw the chair onto the front thighs. You can also use your hands. Once your thighs are supported, reach under the chair and have your fingertips extending toward the feet. If you have this right, it should be very quieting. If you have it wrong, it's very disturbing. So you'll definitely know which camp you're in and if you need to adjust. Make sure to adjust if this is not quieting. You might need more thigh support. You might need the chair closer to the hip creases. The chair needs to be close so that the thighs can rest. You might need something under your head if the floor is bothering the head. So just make sure to create a setup that is sustainable. We're going to transition into ear pressure pose before we
come into our pranayama practice. So you're going to kind of use your fingertips or your hands to help you push the chair away a little bit. You're going to bring your toes now onto the chair so that your knees can come near to your ears. And you're going to clamp your knees around your ears, still reaching through the chair. And if you have trouble reaching the ears, you can also try this without the chair, with your toes on the floor, clamping your knees in towards the sides of the head. And you're going to start to extend your arms and release your hips as slowly as you can back to the floor. And once your feet come down, push yourself to the head side of your setup so that your head and shoulders come down directly to the floor. And you can put your feet back in bound angle or swastikasana. And if you're crossing ankles, maybe this time have the opposite stacked position. So you're getting both sides in. And we're going to try to transition from here to our pranayama setup without disturbing the physical body or the brain more than is necessary. So you're going to just kind of unfold your mat if you have the folded mat. And we are going to work with pranayama support. So we want to fold a couple blankets so that we have the lung tissue elevated and expanded is the idea. You can just take 2 blankets and you're going to open them so they're wide. Nice big blankets. And then you can kind of zigzag fold them, tri-fold them, which will give you evenness when you tri-fold them. And we're going to create a tiered setup. So they're not going to be stacked evenly on top of each other. As you know, we've done this. You want to leave the lower blanket, about a fourth of it free, and then the top blanket will cover the rest of that lower blanket. So the very top of this setup will be for your head, and you can adjust that once you are reclining. You can kind of, I call it a snail, just kind of curls up and makes a nice big head support. If you sense you're going to be chilly, make sure to cover up. Also, if you know that your eyes have trouble staying closed or restful when you're in Shavasana or Pranayama, you might also put something over your eyes. Just make sure it's not a lot of pressure. Something light like an eye pillow or even just the strap that you've been using for yoga. So your butt should be completely on the floor. The lower back is not really touching much either. The first layer of blanket is starting kind of where your kidneys are and then up to the lowest ribs. The second blanket will start at your lowest ribs, and then of course the head will be sufficiently supported so your chin and chest are meeting. And then unfold the arms with your palms up. Taking the first few moments, well, first of all, making sure that the setup is correct. So adjust the blankets if needed. And then once you are set up and supported, now just witnessing your baseline breathing without any conditions on the breath, witnessing the breath. You're going to lightly enter Ujjayi Pranayama, exhalation only, maybe every exhale, maybe every other exhale. Never agitating the brain. So pranayama, I'm trying to quiet the sense organs, withdraw the sense organs, and soothe the nervous system. So you want to really be a gentle taskmaster with the pranayama practices. You're constantly observing the effect on the brain. Ujjayi exhales, very light constriction of the glottis muscle in the back of the throat. You can create that ocean sounding wave of breath that paints a layer of sound on the breath that we can study more closely, smooth the breath, control the breath. It's important not to harden your abdomen when you're working with exhale. Also, when you notice the breaths in, we're not inflating the belly. The belly shouldn't rise up above the lower ribs. Practicing the Ujjayi exhales at your own pace for the next minute. When you come into your next in-breath, just leave your breath be, come back to simple breath observation without any conditions on the breath. And as you're breathing here, just start to pay attention to the very end of the exhalation. Is there a pause? You're not creating a pause, you're just noticing if there is a pause. A moment where the body is sated by breath, there's no inhale or exhale happening. The moment of union, the definition of yoga, to join. One of the most obvious unions there is in the body is inhale meeting exhale, exhale meeting inhale. So we are going to just dip in very lightly today to Kumbhaka, breath retention, specifically our
holding our breath out. So even if there wasn't a pause that you noticed, you're going to see if you can just suspend your breath at the bottom of the exhale just for a beat, where you're neither breathing in nor out. And you might again try with every exhalation. And if you notice that's agitating or the breath kind of gets away from you, then you're going to separate those attempts by as many easy breath cycles as you need. And just see if you can do this kumbhaka, holding the breath out just for a beat. Make 3 attempts. They might be all in a row, they might be separated. Just go ahead and begin as you're ready. Noticing that urge to breathe in. And you're going to find your way back now to simple breath observation. And you're just going to shift as much as you need to your side to remove the pranayama supports. And we'll be spending the last 2 minutes just in shavasana. You might still keep some head support, but just make sure nothing is below the head. Just like the spaces between breaths, noticing little gaps between thoughts. You can choose to stay longer if you like. You can come out now. Make sure to come through a sideline position before you come up to seated. Just taking a couple moments sitting quietly. From a place within me that I know to be divine, I honor that place within you.
Namaste.